Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to call the first of two meetings to order today. Folks that are following along in the room or online will note that the configuration here is a little bit different. I'll introduce some of these new faces just a moment. We do have a small piece of municipal business to take care of. So I will first call to order the special council meeting of Wednesday, April 30th, 2025 order. Thank you for joining. I'd like to begin by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on traditional unceded territory of the Squamish. Peoples have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Nicolella Island. And first item on the special council meeting today is approval of the agenda. I'll look to the corporate officer for the addition of any late items.
The bylaws that are up for consideration of adoption were added to the agenda yesterday.
Okay. Fantastic. And with that, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Councilor Getty, seconded by Councilor Fast. Any discussion, changes, or amendments? Not seeing any, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously. Moving on to section 2, bylaws 2.1, parcel taxes and utility user rate bylaws. We have our Chief Financial Officer, Kristen Watson, joining us online here today for any comments that you'd like to make.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing further to add to the agenda. The bylaws are the water rates for each of the 7 utility systems, a utility rate bylaw for our sewage system, as well as parcel tax rate adjustments for 3 of the water systems, and a new parcel tax for the King Edward Bay parcel, the King Edward Bay utility system. And those are the bylaws in front of you today. They have had 3 readings. We ask that council give 4th reading and adoption at this meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. I'll look to council for any questions from the CFO. Council Fast.
It looks like there's a garbage parcel rate on here that I didn't hear you mention, but that's part of the package, right?
Yes, correct. Thank you. I missed that one.
Not seeing any further questions. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Thanks, Councilor Saunders.
Just move it as written.
You can just say move the recommendation.
Move the recommendations as noted in the agenda.
Okay, moved by Councilor Saunders, seconded by Councilor Wake. Any discussion on this item? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries unanimously. And then moving on to section 3, a motion to adjourn by Councilor Getty, seconded by Councilor Saunders. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously, and we are adjourned. And all of our meetings went like that. Moving on to the main event today, I will call the special council meeting with the Islands Trust Executive Committee of Wednesday, April 30th, 2025 to order, and I'll take a little bit more time starting on this one for folks that are joining us online or later. I'd like to introduce, as I usually do, the members of Bowen Islands Elected Council, and then let the chair of the Islands Trust introduce the members of her staff council as well before we get to the agenda. So on my far left, we have Councillor Tim Lake. To his right is Councillor Islands Trustee Sue Ellen Fast. To her right is Councillor Islands Trustee Judy Getty. To my far right is Councillor Islands Trustee, or just Councillor this term, Allison Morris. To her left is Councillor John Saunders, and we're also joined by members of our professional staff here today, including our Chief Administrative Officer, Kieran Dillon, and our Corporate Officer, Sophie Insignia, and our Manager of Planning and Development, who I rarely introduce at the start of meetings, but definitely an integral part of our team. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Chair Patrick, to say a few words of introduction, and perhaps introduce the members of the Islands Trust that are joining us here today.
I'm happy to. Thank you so much for having us in this incredibly beautiful brand new facility. I'll start with who's online. I see a large, you don't know it, David, but you're bigger than ever on the screen here. So we have Vice Chair Maud from Main Island. And over here we have Vice Chair Tim Peterson from Muscogee Island. In the room we have Toby Elliott, Vice Chair from Gabriola Island. And myself, I'm Laura Patrick. I'm from Salt Spring Island and Chair of Trust Council. Our staff in that we have today, we have CAO Brownie, We have Director Frater and we have Director Mobs online and Director Marler. Did I miss anybody? There we are. Yeah, thank you for having us. Oops,
Stefan.
oh, there he is. Sorry, Director Cermak. And that's part of planning.
Right on. It is wonderful to have you in the room today. I know this meeting is a long time. Schedules are busy and as elected officials, we all know the goals and the stresses of the job, but being able to have you folks in the room and joining us here today for our first joint meeting is a real privilege that I'm tickled by, that it's come to pass, that it's happened. So the structure of our meeting today, for those in the room and following along, we do have an agenda. This is likely going to feel like more like a committee of the whole meeting or a looser agenda. So as we move past public comments and into discussion topics, just to frame this up a little bit, we have some topics here that we might reorder a little bit, just given the presentations that we're going to receive. But this is really a forum for both the Islands Trust and Bowen Island Municipality as the only municipality within the trust to come together just to have a conversation about some of the highlights of what's going on, whether it's the policy statement or Bowen Island strategic plan, possibly some discussion on joint advocacy measures that we can take together, and just to really update each other on the good work that each organization is doing and to bring us a bit closer together as to governance bodies, I think, within the landscape of BC. And I feel that both Bowen Island and the Islands Trust are really unique in what they carry out and what they're tasked with. So it's just a real nice opportunity to have everybody in the room to be able to do this versus being here today. So as we move along, I'll look to the corporate counsel for the introduction of any late items. I don't believe we have any. The late items. Before we adopt the agenda, I'll just ask for a quick reordering amendment to swap 3.2 with 3.3. So we have the policy statement, project update, the conservancy update, one after the other, because we'll be receiving some presentations from Islands Trust staff. I think that will just make it flow a little bit easier. And then add an item at 3.6 for open discussion between Bowen Island Council and the Trust Executive. With those amendments being proposed, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any further discussions, changes, or amendments to the agenda? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously. Okay, moving on to public comments. I'll look to our corporate officer for any public comments here today. No public comments. Okay. And we will move directly then on to discussion topics, beginning with 3.1, Islands Trust Policy Statement Project Update. I believe we have a short presentation from Director of Trust Services, Claire Frater.
Let's get the presentation on screen for you here. Well, thank you so much for having us here today. It's just wonderful to be back on Bowen Island. I just love coming here, and there's always such a warm welcome. So it's been fun. It's lovely to see you all, and I'm so pleased to be here for your first joint meeting. I'm Claire Frater, I'm the Director of Trust Area Services with Islands Trust, and we are the non-land use planning department. So we've got everything from communications, advocacy, intergovernmental relations. We have some grant programs, some education programs. So really just a variety of things that we offer with your support of Bowen Island, both with support of Bowen Island and for Bowen Island. So I'd be happy to take any questions later around the operations of our department. And Today, though, we're gonna start off, I'm gonna provide a presentation around the history and overview of our new draft policy statement. That it's a project of Trust Council. It's been in the works now for quite a number of years. And we're tracking towards development of a new draft for consideration, hopefully this summer. So just start off by acknowledging that this work and this project is being done in the territories of Coast Salish people. And we are really looking to work with Coast Salish people in a deep way around both the development of the document and its ultimate implementation. So we're really grateful to be undertaking stewardship and care in those territories. So we'll start at the beginning. You may all be aware the Islands Trust is formed under the Islands Trust Act. And within that act, there's a specific section that calls for the development of a policy statement that really sets the framework within which Islands Trust operates. And so this is all the guidance we have. It must be adopted by bylaw. It must be a general statement of the policies of Trust Council to implement the object of Islands Trust. And as a reminder, the object of the trust is to preserve and protect the trust area and its requirement to unique amenities in cooperation with others. And then it can establish different policies for different parts of the area. If there's something that ever arises that's immensely unique, it can be accommodated within that statement. And again, it must be approved by the minister. Now, the Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs approves this bylaw. So I thought we'd just start with, why does it matter? Why should you be interested today in getting involved, working with your communities on this policy statement? It's required. It's essential to the operations of Islands Trust. It sets the vision. So this document is the one that is used to approve all the bylaws. It really sets out the values of Islands Trust. It operates, I'll move on to the next slide. It operates in a way that's foundational. And so I really think that this warrants attention and focus, guides all our decision making, and it sets the strategy for land use planning that ultimately will influence the official community plan here at Bowman. So we've got some graphics here. Some people sort of wonder how the Islands Trust works, and I'd like to provide this graphic just showing that official community plans and land use bylaws are nested with the Islands Trust policy statement in the same way that they're nested in regional districts under a regional growth strategy. They're different types of documents, slightly different function, but the concept is similar. And the one thing to know is this policy statement applies trust-wide. So it's throughout the Islands Trust area, and in those areas where it applies, the regional district growth strategy does not apply. So you're guided solely by the policy statement for land use planning. And right through, again, just this consistency, we have the act that informs the policy statement, that informs official community plans, flows right down into land use bylaws. And so here we are. So the document, I would say, is old, adopted last in 1990. And so it's really a bit vintage. So there's really been a initiative to update it, modernize it, make it more relevant for our time. And when it was the project to update it was initiated a number of years ago now, there was a desire for focus on three main areas. I sort of laugh now because it was intended to be like the warm-up phase. Let's get used to amending this document on a regular basis. And here we are quite a number of years later, still not amended. But the scope was intended to have been reconciliation, climate action, and affordable housing. Since then, I think it's been broadening and scope is increasing around the types of topics that are being discussed, but that was really the impetus for updating the document. And it was intended to be done in a way that accommodated the values held by Islanders. This is a document by Islanders for Islanders. And it was meant to be informed in a way that the last version was not by Indigenous peoples, so that their voices and aspirations can also be reflected in the document. So it's been quite a process to date to get to where we are now. Multiple rounds of engagement, both with the public and with Indigenous governments. And we've undertaken a number of referral processes as well. So it started, this particular amendment attempt started in 2019. And we did a really broad engagement that involved going out with software called Thought Exchange, which allowed people to share their hopes, concerns, and opportunities. And it was a fun exercise with community, and it really at that time was an opportunity to think really big. So I talk about it in terms of a funnel. We started really up here. What are your values? I sort of gathered all that input from community. And then we had a bit of a draft, and then we went to phase 2, which was much more about policy directions. So we talked more specifically around the themes of climate reconciliation and housing and sort of narrowed down those policy directions. And then the most recent phase of engagement that we undertook in 2022 was about an actual draft document that came out. And so it's been sort of a process of narrowing the topics and landing in an actual draft. Concurrent to the public engagement, we've undertaken engagement with nations through a number of phases as well, trying to feed in their values and hopes for the document and try and reach compromise around where we can reflect all the different things that we're hearing. After the 2022 engagement, we did refer the draft out to a whole number of agencies, and including Bowen Island, and have been reflecting back that commentary into a newer draft. There is a vast amount of information on the island's 2050 webpage, and it will be updated hopefully in the coming months with even more information. But we've tried to be as transparent as possible about all the different steps that have happened, all the engagement materials, all the history of draft policy statements, legal opinions that have been made public. Lots and lots of reading to be had there if you're interested in how we got to where we are. So just a little bit more about working with Indigenous governing bodies. We've had quite a number of meetings, and we've had like staff to staff referrals and also meetings with different governments. And this last draft that's been produced was, we took sort of 6 months to refer it out to nations and have staff to staff meetings so we could do a better job of incorporating the feedback we were getting and working in a collegial way around how does this land, does this accurately reflect what we heard? So that was a good exercise for us. I think it's still an imperfect exercise. We're getting better at it, working a muscle that we haven't used very strongly in the past. So there's still work to go. I just wanted to share some of the key messaging we had heard from nations through some of these meetings we've been having. One is that there was a preference for co-design of the entire process itself. So we heard strongly that, you know, if you really intend to work with us in a deep way, that means backing up and working with us to design the process by which you're going to go about the amending. That said, most of the nations understood that this started in 2019. We're a long way down that road. So this preference was expressed, but at no time were we told you should stop now and, you know, start fresh. So we've heard the preference, but also we haven't been asked to stop completely. So, but we know that in future, that would be the desire, is that they're with us from the very beginning and that it is a truly collaborative exercise. We've also heard that as we undertake drafting, there was a really strong desire to acknowledge Indigenous self-governance and inherent rights to be self-governing decision makers in their respective territories, and that they are the stewards of this and have been since time immemorial. And also a desire to reflect that the UN Declaration affirms Indigenous governing bodies' rights to participate in decision-making matters and to get their free, prior, and informed consent. So that is something, you know, those are deep and meaningful statements, and we're trying to best reflect how we accommodate them, how do we reflect them in the document, where do we fit as a unique agency, and so those discussions continue. And we certainly have informed our council, and there's thoughtful work going on in that space, I think. But what we're hearing generally, as a conclusion of all that, general support, but with caution, and trying to do so in a thoughtful and careful manner. And I guess I would just add, we have 26 nations in the trust area. So there's quite a number of conversations going on with differing levels of interest and attention to detail, I would say. So it's been not been a small undertaking. So finally, I wanted to draw your attention to Bowen, because we have really loved talking with your community. And your community has been fairly interested in this process in the past, and we've had a great turnout for some of the engagement we've done. You'll see here, we're in the picture here, where we rode the ferry for 2 days and had so many wonderful conversations, and I really enjoyed that time. And in fact, we rode the ferry throughout the Trust area, but Bowen in particular, you've got such a regular schedule and just a highly commuting population. It was great to have such engagement. So in 2019, we rode the ferries. We also had an open house here, and we did online engagement. 2021, of course, the pandemic, so we were completely online. And then 2022, during one of those gaps in our lockdowns, we managed to get out and do some in-person engagement. And we held a community booth down on the lawn, or down by the lawn by the ferry, and had an open house at your library. And got great feedback. And it's funny, because one of the things I remember most about being here on Bowen was a conversation around Starry Nights. And one of the values that really emerged from Bowen from people who said, you know, one of the things we love is about Starry Nights, and that theme just came up again at one of our most recent committee meetings around the drafting of the document. It made me reflect back that was something that really emerged from Bowen. That's something this community loves and wanted to protect. And it's just made me reflect. We had some great conversations here, and I think you're so close to Metro Vancouver, there's just a deep love of protecting your island. And it really shone through. I think the sense of needing to protect this place is so strong. And we really felt that when we were here. And just really so grateful for the work. So this is just an example of a poster board that we had out here showing sort of your biodiversity, sort of high, medium, low biodiversity. And then we've overlaid the parks just to kind of give people some thinking around what is your vision? What do you value? What do you love here? And then some of the highlights we had, I won't read through this, but just all kinds of themes that came up. And some of which we're able to accommodate in the document, and some of which we can't. You'll note here, a number of them are relating to things that we would be advocating about. There's been a decision to make the document more simple, a little bit shorter than it was, and to not have advocacy statements in there in the bylaw. Of course, council and Bowen Island Municipality can partner at any time on advocating. To do so, it doesn't have to be in the bylaw. So there's a number of topics in here like oil tanker traffic or microplastics that we wouldn't have regulatory authority for. So at this time, those topics would not be taken up because we're not including advocacy in the document. Also feedback around structure, language, need for a glossary, all kinds of things. And I just want to acknowledge, I guess I should have done so earlier, all of Daniel's work. Yeah, really great at joining our staff and contributing ideas and thoughtful recommendations that we've done our best to accommodate in the document. So just want to acknowledge that, express gratitude. And generally, you'll see the themes that we've heard throughout the trust area are similar, a little bit different at times, but this kind of our big engagement that we did trust-wide in 2022, these were the top themes that emerged. So everything from private docks, we heard a lack of desire for tackling the topic of desalination, concerns around agriculture, more information, and we did hear clearly a simpler document would be better for the public. And so here we are. There's a new draft that is being considered and working its way through our various committees. It's been sitting with our committee of the whole, recently transferred to our trust programs committee. And there is a hope that it will go back to committee of the whole at the end of May and then be considered at some point. We're thinking now maybe in July by trust council for consideration of first reading. That timeline is aspirational, I think, and it remains to be seen how much more drafting work that council would like to undertake. Should all that play out, move on here. We have a timeline now of you'll see all that's come, and then we'll be planning for engagement to come as the next step. So go back out to the public, go back out to nations, and go back out to referral agencies and ask, what is the feedback now and where we're at? And then do whatever work is needed and then bring it back for second.
Can you explain what's the third line down starts? What's the difference between the arrows?
Okay. So there's the first two lines there are the public process or the bylaw drafting process. The bottom line is the work we're doing in parallel with Indigenous governing bodies.
Thank you.
So
Just
yeah.
the text a little small. Thank you.
So next steps, the committees are to finish the editing. So really it's political at this point. There's been a draft provided and it's being massaged. It's being gently expressionist, but being finessed by our elected officials to get it to a place where it's ready for council to consider for first reading. It would then be formally referred, and we're intending on up to a 6-month engagement period to give everyone ample time to consider the feedback they'd like to provide. That will include an online public survey, an online community workshop, and in-person event if requested by Bowen Island Municipality. We would then be redrafting based on all of that feedback and then have consideration of reading, and then very finally ministerial adoption or ministerial approval, sorry, that should read. And then there would be adoption by trust council. With all that, I'm very happy to take questions or turn it over to the executive committee to answer questions.
Sure, I'll look to council for any questions, comments.
The July meeting would be a special meeting, or they're not gonna extend the June
No,
meeting?
yes, it would be a special meeting. There's been a decision made that really it's a consequential enough topic that we should be dealt with at special meetings.
It was a great overview. We'll certainly be following the process closely. I know that it's not without its passions and enthusiasms baked into it. I look forward to the outcome in July. Yes, Councilor Vance.
Just to, I'm on this committee that's considering it now. We met yesterday, Trust Programs Committee. And so if you have questions, I'm usually up to date. What's going on locally, you know, just from the Bowen perspective.
Okay, don't see any further questions. We'll move on to Islands Trust Conservancy update.
So I'll just start by letting you know, it's on the agenda as an update, but given that this is your first joint meeting, I decided to make it a little bit more of an overview. So that then we can discuss the update in the context of you knowing a little bit more about what the Conservancy does. Is that suitable for all? Thank you. Little overviews, welcome, okay. So just wanna, right off the top here, so Islands Trust Conservancy is, so we has its own reconciliation declaration. It's a separate body from Trust Council. And the board is half elected trustees, so 3 elected trustees, and 3 people who are appointed by the minister. So for things like its reconciliation declaration, it's done separately, it has its own body, as its own board. And within this declaration, the Conservancy acknowledges that it works in Coast Salish territory. It sets out that it's going to strive for knowledge sharing, understanding, and collaboration, and then signals that it's committed to protecting and preserving and protecting in a way that honors and respects reconciliation and their mutually respectful relationships with Coast Salish peoples. And the board is really deeply committed to this and is trying very hard to push boundaries right now in the space of reconciliation. So it's a great pleasure to watch what's going on. So the Islands Trust Conservancy has a particular mandate that's set out in the Islands Trust Act that is to protect special places throughout the Islands Trust area generally. You can see that they've set out their mission, which is to encourage, undertake, and assist in voluntary conservation initiatives. And their vision is to create a network of protected areas that protects in perpetuity the natural systems of all the islands of the Salish. We're supported by a team of 7 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff, which you can see here range from our administrative staff, manager, through to people working on the land, such as our property management specialists and covenant management and breach specialists. As I mentioned, the board is structured in such a way that we've got the 2 people, and I'll just acknowledge Toby Elliott here is currently on the Conservancy, and Swillen Fast is tasked on the Conservancy. So I'm sure certainly they'll be able to answer all of your questions. And we have appointed trustees that are appointed from a term of 1 to 3 years by the minister. So the Act sets out what the Conservancy can do. So it is obligated to prepare a 5-year plan, an annual report, and an audit report, and it can hold money, grants, covenants, and land. And it is required to manage its property. And I think that is taken quite seriously here, because if you know much about managing protected areas, you can't just leave them, they'll be covered in invasive species and trespassed on and so on. So there's an active management component to what the Conservancy does. There is a really strong connection between the Conservancy and the other parts of Islands Trust, set out in various agreements around how we operate and coordinate with each other, and making sure even that when land use planning is being undertaken, that referrals go back and forth, so that the interests of the protected areas be taken into account when doing land use planning, but also vice versa. If there is land use planning that's being undertaken, they can consider whether land should maybe be set aside as part of the development. You could go to the Conservancy as a protected area if, for example, there's to be increased density. So one of the reasons the Islands Trust Conservancy is important is the nature of the Islands Trust area, which has more than 65% of land in private hands. This, of course, is very different than the rest of British Columbia, where it's about 1% is private land and the rest is crown. Also in the trust area, we've got a high level of species richness and also quite a number of species and ecosystems at risk. Over here, you've got more coastal western hemlock, but much of the Southern Gulf Islands are part of the coastal Douglas fir ecosystem, which only has 1% of its extent remaining. So in that very, small piece of what's left, we're hoping to sort of get what we call the best of what's left, and really try and high grade and put the money and attention on those ecosystems that are most at risk. Of course, protecting beautiful areas here on Bowen as well. As you may know, even here on Bowen, loss of habitat is the largest threat to biodiversity, particularly on islands because of the nature of them. And managing and protecting natural habitat on privately owned land is key for this entire region. We can't simply rely on just owning land. It's a matter of education and helping landowners be great stewards of the properties that they love. Just thought I'd let you know where the board is at. It has set out some goals for itself. Really, it's a science-based organization with a strong focus on knowledge-based conservation planning. They have a 10-year conservation plan that's built off mapping and analysis of that mapping to really make sure that we're focusing effort in on the best properties and helping to communicate around how we implement our conservation priorities. The second is around collaboration. So the Conservancy is deeply about partnerships and about relationships and is always trying to pull people in and collaborate and build relationships where it can. It's also worked on continuing to conserve new properties, right? The world is changing around us and new opportunities arise, so that it has a growth mindset, I would say, around continued acquisitions as we go on. And it also wants to be a strong voice for conservation. So in the region, there's a lot of support for the nonprofit land trusts. We've really played a role in being assistive and guiding to smaller land trusts and have really welcomed partnerships with Bowen Island Conservancy, which is a powerhouse of a local land trust. This picture here is taken from an online interactive map we have on the website. So if you're ever interested, I can show you where it is, but you can take a tour of all the properties, and we have information on each property with pictures of each property, information on its management plans, the history of how it came to be donated. It's quite a fun way to poke about and understand, you're all contributing to this legacy and this network of protected areas. If you want to see how Bowen's contribution is supporting, you can go and have a look and tour around and feel very proud of all these places that you've helped to protect. So currently there's 115 properties made up of 34 nature reserves and 81 conservation covenants on both public and private land. We take care of these properties and take it very seriously. So every year we go out to all of the properties and monitor to make sure that they're in good shape and that they are, we look for trespass, we look for damage. We're also monitoring invasive species to ensure that we're taking good care of the ecological integrity that's there. And as you can see, it's all done in partnership. There is always volunteers out with us. We've got landowners participating. We're partnering with other agencies and really trying to get out there. This is taken at Nature Reserve Celebration on Keats Island here in Howe Sound, where we had the pleasure of being 2 years ago, I think it was. And just a wonderful community event post-pandemic to celebrate what had taken 15 years to achieve of the Sandy Beach Nature Reserve. If you're ever on Keats Island, I encourage you to go visit. It is just a spectacular spot, really achieved through long-term community vision that they knew that special place needed to be protected. And here we just another picture of restoring with community members. So it takes a team, it takes a community, and throughout the islanders show up and they help us care for these lands. And there's just so much love and effort and hard work put in. So it's just the backbone of our work is the volunteers and partners that we have. And it's also protecting passive recreation. These are places in our nature reserve. Some are closed for ecological or hazard reasons, but many of them allow for passive recreation and allow people to connect with nature and have places of refuge. And so here on Bowen, we're very pleased to have the Singing Woods Nature Reserve. I've just got some facts there for you, but 9-hectare property was transferred in the 1990s, and we undertake management with Bowen Island Conservancy. There's the Fairy Fen Nature Reserve. This one's 18 hectares. You probably all know them. I'm sure you know them well and visit them often, maybe. Protected in 2005, and we work with local partners, including the Bowen Island Conservancy on the management of that property. One of my favorites. And Gifford Otter Nature Reserve. This one's smaller. It's 3 hectares, protected in 2006. And this one's particularly important on the island because it allows for species to migrate between it, acts as a corridor. And then we have covenants as well. And so with covenants, there's a real focus on helping to restore these properties, many on private land. in this case on public land on your own Bowen. Got co-op students that love to get their hands dirty working with us. This is a picture of our summer co-op student last summer. So we've got the Terminal Creek covenants, which were brought about in 1999. This was an example of one that came as a result of development, where there was, you know, I can't genuinely remember the history, but Bowen Island municipality at the time must have decided that the transfer to the Conservancy was warranted for the development that was proposed.
Just
And
barely a municipality, 1999.
yeah, one of the first moves, I guess, was to help transfer property to the Conservancy. And the McIntyre Covenant, which is 1.2 hectares, was donated by Betty McIntyre and has been protected jointly with the Conservancy since 1999. And finally, we've been really a very privileged recipient of a grant from Environment and Climate Change Canada of about $200,000 a year, which has been focused on ecosystem restoration and enhancement. And so these funds have allowed us to really undertake overdue management around taking care of species at risk. And so we've been undertaking studies, we've been doing planting, invasive species removal, and it's really been great. The grant may come to an end in March. So we're in the last year of really trying to achieve some of the vague management objectives that we've had. So it's been just a great partnership with Environment Canada. Yeah, it's been fantastic. I think over the term of the grant, it's been about 1.2 million. And so finally, just so you know, we have a strategic giving program. And so we work with donors on the long term around how do we provide funding from the community to continue to support the Conservancy and provide activities that aren't funded from the tax base. So we work with donors, partners, and especially with the state professionals. We're really trying to work on planned giving as an opportunity to move forward. We have an opportunity fund that people can donate to, and then we leverage that to help land acquisition projects get going in the region. So conservancies like Bowen Island Conservancy can apply for funds to get going on opportunities before they're public. So it helps pay for things like surveys and, you know, some of the hard costs that happen before you're actually out fundraising. So it helps local conservancies take on those new acquisitions. And nations as well are welcome to apply. And we give presentations around the region around what it is to give to nature and what the tax benefits would be. So finally, if you're interested, there's lots of information on the website. We encourage you to sign up for all of our communication channels. And yeah, so happy to answer more about it. I know Vice Chair Elliott has a few words to say about the 35th anniversary that we're celebrating this year as well. And just before I get there, I'll just finish up. The last slide here is around the 5-year plan. We're just drafting a new 5-year plan. We're about to be sending letters out to nations and working with them on a draft. And then once that's drafted, it will be coming to you for referral and engagement in 2026, heading to the minister, I think, late 2026. So with that, thank you, and over to Vice Chair Elliott.
Thank you, Director Frater. Yeah, this is the 35th anniversary, so it's a really good opportunity to celebrate the stories of conservation in the Gulf Islands. And so we have a whole plan of engagement activities and would welcome Bowen to be involved if you wish. We'll be hosting a presentation at June Trust Council to celebrate the 35th anniversary. We're hosting booths at different fall fairs and farmers markets and such, Gabriela Island, Salt Spring, and Pender in the summer months in September. So if you'd like us to come to Bowen or support, jointly support a booth, that would be wonderful. And there'll be some special editions of the Heron newsletter. And I also wanted to point out, I noticed there was only 2 covenants on Bowen.
We have no
None?
No
Covenants. Yeah, and so this might be an opportunity to share with your community if you're not familiar with the natural area. Natural area tax protection tax exemption program. We've actually secured a grant, and I'm not sure when that report's coming out, to evaluate increasing the tax rebate or exemption for protected area on your property. So currently you can receive an annual property tax exemption of 65% on the protected portion of your land. And so that's of course an incentive for landowners. The qualifications are you must own land in the trust area, of course, and it must be about 5 acres inside. And we typically look for land that are next to or adjacent to protected areas And that might increase sort of, wildlife corridors or such. We do struggle with, capacity. It's always a challenge. And so, sometimes the covenants take a long time to secure and go through different processes, but maybe this is an opportunity to promote the NAPTEP program to the Bowen Island community. And if people are interested in putting covenants on their lands. So yeah, any questions or? Yeah.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that program and just curious about it. And this is just my lack of knowledge of these government things work. But if someone were to do that and get a covenant for 5 acres or 10 acres, protect some area, great. I absolutely see the value in that. Can that like disappear 10 years later or 15 years later because a different council or something says, let's get rid of that covenant, or are these like in perpetuity?
Begins with the title of the land? No, sorry, Claire, maybe, oh, okay, so it shouldn't disappear. Theoretically, a new landowner could, purchasing the land, override the covenant,
They
but
could.
we do monitor, and so that's part of the value of the Conservancy is staff are in contact with landholders. We get an annual report monitoring how the covenants are protected. If there's invasive species and there's sort of an agreement with the landholder to undertake the management of that area, and we support them in that. So yeah, it runs with the title and it should be protected in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Add anything?
Through the chair to supplement that a little bit, just we monitor in order to enforce if we have to.
That's what I mean. Can
Yeah,
you
so they'll,
enforce?
yeah, so it's different than a restrictive covenant in a way that could be, changed by council. They're meant to be durable, they're meant to be in perpetuity. And many of them have been donated, and the recipients have also received an income tax receipt. So no, they're meant to be durable, and we will enforce if required, but we really, if we find issues, we try to, reach accommodation and have the issue remedied voluntarily.
We have seen some actual, we've had to enforce and
Yes.
uphold the terms of the covenant and require replanting or restoration
Okay.
where there was breach.
Great. Thanks.
That's true.
I just want to share, we had a recent meeting, a joint meeting between the executive committee and for the Conservancy. And we struck a working group, hasn't even met yet, to just explore the concept. Actually, another kind of conservation fund, like they have out in Kootenays, for funding conservation work on private land. So we've just initiated a joint working group to have that start. And I was thinking perhaps we probably should stretch out and have a Bowen trustee join that working group as well, just as we brainstorm, is that a possibility? Is that needed in our region? Would it be beneficial?
Yes, Councilor Morse.
With NAPTEC, I've talked to a few people and they're reluctant to join it because basically if all the money, if I'm understanding correctly, if they've got family and they want to be able to leave the property to their family, and then the family might want to have to subdivide to pay for it. If you do that, then you've got to repay all the taxes that yeah. So I think it removes a lot of future planning, family planning. And we've got a lot of the large parcels around here are family owned and been in the family for years. So that's my understanding of a lot of reason why there hasn't been any pickup on that. And the other thing that has always bothered me about the Conservancy, the goals are great, no problem at all with that, but it's very clear in the act that the land belongs to the province. And so why isn't the province paying for this? If the land belonged to the province and the province decided to take it, they could do whatever they wanted with it. And, in my former life as a tax accountant, estate planner, we had experiences with that where land was given with specific understandings, not necessarily the Conservancy, but the province decided to do and use it for something totally differently than what it was given.
So that sort of leads in my mind to one of the conversation about the request for provincial review and sort of reevaluating if the Islands Trust or the Conservancy is protecting and preserving all these lands and undertaking the management of it, which is increasingly challenging as climate change impacts and increased pressures from development. How can we request more support for this provincial mandate, really, for those protected areas? So I think that's a good advocacy point to the province, not to maybe pay for it all, but perhaps contribute more. Because we keep getting more and more requests, and that's the other, it's a good challenge. Lots of people actually want NAPTEP covenants or more areas protected, and we just organizationally struggle with the capacity to do that management, because once we take on the property, you've got to manage it. So that's the challenge, is the stewardship over the long haul.
And my last question has to do with the grant. We have a lot of gorse. Is there any money left over that we could be used to get rid of the gorse?
That's slightly too operational for me. I don't know. But certainly if, is it course, so the funding that we have needs to take care of the nature reserves and covenants within the protection of Islands Trust Conservancy. But certainly that is something we could look at and provide support for how can we find the resources to remove gorse. And also best practice, having visited on South Pender, there was a big gorse cleanup and someone dragged the gorse and flower across the protected area. And then of course, years later, we had gorse showing up where it will be planted and dragged. So there's also really, you know, when you're managing gorse, broom and other invasives, there's best practice around how they're removed. So we can put on things like education webinars. So that might be an opportunity. You know, we could do education series around best practice invasive species removal as part of our Trust Council's education program. That could be something that might be of interest.
Along with Daphne Laura.
Other questions? Maybe this one for our planner, and I was actually unfamiliar with the NAPTEP program. Would those sorts of covenants be eligible for integration under our own conservation development policy when we're talking to property owners?
Through the chair, it's a program I bring up with property owners who are looking for some way to protect property. Sometimes the challenge is, as you say, that the NAPTEP program has this ability to like pay back the property tax that you've been exempt from to essentially like remove the covenant. So in that sense, we wouldn't say, like for our conservation development policy, if somebody said, okay, I'm going to protect half my property, I'm going to enter it into NAPTEP, we would probably say, well, that's not sufficient, because you know, in 10 years you could buy it out and remove it. You know, we want to layer it with our own protective covenant to say that that's great, you can enter NAPTEP, but we want to ensure that it remains protected from development in perpetuity.
Can it be layered with the municipal covenant on top of it? Is that
Probably, I would think so.
Yeah.
They both have the same goal, protecting property. So I would imagine like when we are, like we just did a public hearing with a property that is proposing a protective covenant, I would imagine that they might have the option that if it's eligible, you know, to seek property tax exemptions as well, given that it's protected, it can't be developed.
Councilor Fast?
The first time I've ever heard about a NAPTEP program covenant being purchased back.
Yeah,
I don't think that's common. Has that
No.
happened?
I think what it is actually, if the terms of the covenant are breached, we can then, there can be a reclamation of taxes. I believe the covenant stays on. But the tax, there's this trigger for repayment. So it's actually a big stick in terms of don't violate your covenant. We can get more details to you, but yeah, I don't believe the covenant comes off,
No.
but certainly there is a large fine. That essentially is what it is, that could be applied if there's a violation of the covenant terms.
I think you can buy it.
Yeah, so I need to have a look again. I'm a little bit dated in terms of that. The one thing I would add, if I may, Chair,
Yep.
is that, you know, just placing a covenant on your property can result in sort of a devaluation of that portion that's being protected. So quite often there is a lowering of the property taxes anyway. And for most areas in this region, the donation of property could also be eligible for eco gifts receipt. So for landowners, there are, you know, definite financial benefits to protecting land in this region for both income tax and property tax, even without the NAPTEP program.
Yeah, that's what happened with the David Otter Nature Preserve. It's not open to the public, and it was part of the get the name of the redevelopment that happened, but it was
Irish Trail.
well, yeah, but more than Hikers Trail. And it was through the you call it again? Anyway, the federal eco gift program. So basically, instead of sending a big chunk of income tax off to Ottawa, they were able to protect their property that they would probably have been protecting anyway with the help of the Islands Trust Conservancy. So it's a way to leave, big tax bills that you might send to Ottawa, you can leave them on the island. So there's a bunch of different tools, and the Islands Trust Conservancy uses a bunch of them. And I've never heard of a conservation covenant that could get bought out. So I'd be really curious if you could loop me in on that
We
email
certainly
as
have,
well.
I certainly have, well, Fred, I'm sure there's information on our website. I'm just a little bit dated on it.
Because the purpose of them is that it's perpetuity.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Yes, Council Pastor.
Just another way to think about the conservancy and the trust area wide services, the other ones, and planning is if you think about a saguaro cactus with 3 arms. And for Bowen, there's the trust area services, which is like the Federation of Islands, the different topics, the advocacy, the outreach. And then there's the Islands Trust Conservancy. So that's the land protection arm. And then the 3rd arm would be planning, which we do in-house. So we don't participate in that. We don't pay for it or get involved outside of when there's outreach about things that we do participate in, like the trust policy statement. So in case that's useful to anybody.
Council Fest. Okay, moving on to 3.3, the Islands Trust Provincial Review. So this probably a conversation for council to council conversation. I know that there was the letter that we have linked here to our agenda dated October 16th, 2024 that was sent out, and I think there was some surprise from Bowen Islands Council as to the contents and thrust of that letter. I'm maybe in framing up this conversation, I know that I had the opportunity to have many fruitful conversations with trustees at the Trust Council meeting that I visited, but I'm sure our council would be curious to hear an update on some of the conversations with the province, response from the province, and maybe the inside baseball of what's happening with trust governance general, as far as it can be shared in a meeting that's being live streamed to the world right now.
I'd be happy to sort of start with some of the historical context of how we got to where we are. Back in June of 22, 2 trustees that couldn't have been any more opposite. Both jointly sponsored a request for the province to review the Islands Trust. It was quite a conversation. It was, I think the vote was 21-2 or something on passing it at that time. And in the fall, Minister Cullen, at that time, Minister of Municipal Affairs, responded back with, why don't we just wait for the new trust council to get elected to have their opinion on the review? And that took almost 2 years for this trust council to wrap their head around where were they, and basically presented back the same motion that was made in June of 22, made it again in September of this year. I would encourage you, if you want to hear a very emotional speech, in June Trust Council last year, then MLA Olson really passionately presented to the Trust Council many reasons, primarily focused on First Nations and the future as to why we should be requesting a review back to the province. And he actually had a pretty strong hand. It's even when we made the first request back in June of 22, that the province was like, well, you have to ask us for help. And so it's like, oh, and they're like, oh, ask again. Help. It was what was went forward. So that was the primary reason, was to just really give the province to think about, it's their act. The last time they had done a review was 1987. They had and the June 22 request was very much structured on the same premise that they had done in 1987. And following the 1987 review, the results of that review were handed back to Trust Council of the day, and they made the recommendations for any changes to the act, which were the significant changes to the act that were made in the early 90s. I guess, or 1990, I don't know my year exactly when that came out. So that was sort of the expectation we had, was that it similar type process, the province would do its own review, any recommendations would come back. Recommendations. I think the key thing in this letter was that we were stressing our expectations is this time we would hope the province would actively involve the First Nations who have very strong interests in these items, in the design of the review and the whole process as it goes forward. That was really what the intent was. But we've had no conversations with the minister, and I guess I can look to you for.
Yeah, I would say in terms of follow-up and status, we have followed up on our part. Prior to Chair Patrick taking up the role of chair, previous Chair Luckham wrote to the minister requesting a meeting with our executive committee. We haven't had a response to that. And to some degree, not surprising, given the changes that have happened from provincial election and the changes within the ministry structure and other priorities right now, but we continue to do some outreach and try to follow up and get a conversation on that. We haven't had a response either way.
And I think in the other key message we were trying to be very clear on is we are continuing to work on our own house, our own governance. So there's the governance report from 2022 as well, and Councillor Trustee Getty is the chair of the governance committee, and we will be having by May 16th, I think, or 13th, May 13th, will be a discussion back at the committee of the whole, the trust council, on many of the recommendations of that report. We've been picking away at them slowly through the governance committee, and we'll have another trust council conversation to reassess our priorities of what we've been working on, dispatching some of the issues that may not be agreed with for this current trust council. It's a chance for them to really get into the report. That is our commitment, is to continue, and I know when I ran for chair, that was one of the key things I wanted to focus on, was let's get our house in order and address some of these governance issues that we can.
Your delegation, when you came to trust council and so was that December?
It's like a lifetime ago.
It felt like a very long time ago. I remember taking some notes, and I was very struck with you were very forthright about the implications of that letter being sent to the province with the request, and having not included Bowen Island. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we have intergovernmental responsibilities and relationships and protocol agreement, and I do feel that we our council, I can't speak on behalf of council, but we leapt into that space without having a conversation with our colleagues. I mean, Bowen Island councillors were there, and it was a very difficult conversation. But I personally regret that if it's led to any impression that we should do things separately that are so important and consequential as a request to the province to change our legislation. So I do hope that we can work together on a strategic approach. If ever we do get provinces here, well, that would be council's going to hear about it, and then. Sorry for just being in there, chair and chair.
Councilor Morse.
I'd hate to belabor the point, but the letter that came back to Peter from Nathan Cullen on September 23rd, 2022, his last paragraph said, "I look forward to learning of the measures being taken by the trust in response to the governance management review." So if I'm understanding correctly, nobody ever responded to him on that last paragraph of that letter.
Well, I think it was reiterated in the original request made it clear that we were focused on the external questions of the Islands Trust, and that we were continuing to work on the governance report. That was June 22, it stressed, so raising the governance report, it's like, yes, we're working on it. This letter did the same thing again, I guess, reiterated that we're continuing to work away on what was adopted in the governance report. There's been no external, we haven't done a summary report of where things stand. So that'll be something we'll talk about after May 13th.
Yeah, I'm still curious, just in that letter, so it speaks of structural limitations that the trust is facing as a result of that. Trust Council agrees the same conclusion. Without any systemic change, the Islands Trust cannot meet the challenges of our time. I'm curious if you're able to speak to just a better understanding of what are those structural limitations, and what is it that, from the sense around Trust Council, like what are the challenges that of our time that just cannot be met with that, with the current structure that is so demanding that it requires a all of governance.
Well, I can talk about, I think we can look at how your table functions, and we've got, and I think it just the Southern Gulf Islands alone, we have 5 local trust areas, which has 5 separate governments demanding 5 separate demands on staff. So we do a lot of meeting management. And we do more meeting management than we do actions of actually address findings. I think there's opportunities to find more efficiencies, and I think there is a fairly good commitment from Trust Council. We just even a meeting procedure bylaw in our last Trust Council, there was a real strong recognition that, oops, we do need to keep working better together, because we had 12 different meeting procedure bylaws. Now we have 1. So it's chipping away at the structure that was duplicated 12 times. And some of the biggest challenges we have are housing and climate change that are coming at us with great trust, same things that you're addressing. And it's a time when we have to cooperate more than ever with all the other governments that have their parts of service delivery or other things on these islands. So we're repeating relationships that we have to have many times over in a very small geographic area. Some of our islands have very small populations on it, they have their own.
Trustee Goodman.
Some of the things that have come up was the change to the mandate that the province brought in terms of cooperating with First Nations and trying to figure out how to actually be the body that tries to figure out how to get First Nations involvement on council when it hasn't been delineated and described by the province in terms of how to actually share and make decision making in terms of, so the First Nations question is a big one. And there's protocol agreements that have been developed in terms of the different nations on different local islands, but it's not necessarily something that we can decide ourselves. It's a provincial mandate, so it gets quite complicated and systemic that way. Also, Bowen has, when we decided that we were going to become a municipality, then we took care of all of the problems that we had dealing with the metropolis in terms of roads. Well, the province and the metropolis in terms of all the different jurisdictions. That hasn't happened in, for instance, Salt Spring, and they've had 2 or 3 referendums. So they still have all of these different regional districts. I believe that's the 5 that you're referring to, with all the different divisions of labor that's involved with that. So
7 regional districts.
Multiple. And so, who's the building inspector and who interprets the bylaws and all of that. So that's something that we've sorted out to a certain extent to our rising costs.
Cost, yes.
But, you know, we do have the jurisdiction over that, so we do have a slight advantage in terms of being able to deal with some of the problems that come up in terms of housing and, there's massive issues with respect to bylaw enforcement with, populations exploding and people wanting to do whatever they want to do on their own private property and having all sorts of bylaw implications. And Chris Young was just talking about somebody speaking up on Main Island that was, David, I understand you've got an outlier. It's complicated and it's because it's preserve and protect and because they're all islands with finite resources. It's different from just about every other development area. So it's, yes, it's planning, but it's also much, much deeper in terms of culture and community and, you know, the unique environment, the unique amenities and all of them. How do you describe that? Everything that blows up around the definition of unique amenities on a regular basis. So, it's, there are structural limitations and there are, you know, all of the complications around discussing all the issues. It's interesting.
Vice Chair Peterson, followed by Vice Chair Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. Yeah, I just add some of my thoughts here in terms of the
hear us?
requested province.
We're not getting any sound from you,
Oh,
Vice Chair
I don't know
Peterson.
what's going on. I am not sure why that should be.
Maybe I'll let our corporate officer try and troubleshoot with you on the side. I'll go to Vice Chair Elliott first, and we'll come back.
Sure.
Okay.
It's every.
Oh, sorry, hang on 1 second.
Try taking the headphones off.
No, but Director Cermak says that he can hear. And I'm seeing Vice Chair or Trustee Mod say that he can hear.
Oh, that's the problem we've had before.
So it sounds like we're having that issue that we had before.
We don't have it here. We haven't had it here. It didn't hear once. Yeah.
Right now,
Hi, can you hear me?
oh, that's coming through.
A little bit,
Can you hear me? A little bit?
very, very soft. For speakers.
It's a little red
Okay,
thing beside his name. On the big screen. Oh, okay.
Is it loud enough that it's worth speaking?
That's perfect. Yep, it's all going now.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Leonard. So just wanted to share a little bit of my perspective on the request of the province. There is a lot of complexity in the Islands Trust. Someone touched on the regional districts. We have 7 regional districts. And the all of the service issues around that. And we have there's 27 First Nations. We have a total of 3 protocol agreements. You'll notice if you read the letter that Section D specifically identifies alignment of decision-making processes and structures with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And that is that's some pretty big work. Within the governance report that Councillor Getty was mentioning earlier, that's one of the issues identified in that report is participation of Indigenous voices in decision making. Certainly in the work that has happened around the policy statement, we hear loud and clear from First Nations that they do want voices at our tables, and that is something that the province and only the province can enable. So that's one important section. Another thing that I wanted to touch on is item E in the letter talks about the geographic scope of the organization, and in particular, authority over marine areas. If you look at the maps, the the marine area that's within the Islands Trust area is massive, and it approaches the shorelines of, for example, the Saanich Peninsula and in fact all over the trust area. It's an absolutely massive area. Now, our actual authorities remain a little bit murky in terms of what the province, who has their shares their authorities obviously with the feds, but if you look at the map, we have these jurisdictions that lead within what is it, 300 meters of some of these really built up areas. So that's another thing I think really requires some clarification. And in terms of the funding, I think that's huge. The capacity within this organization to deal with not only with the planning of these 13 separate governing bodies in the local trust areas, but the capacity to build meaningful relationships with 27 First Nations in any way that's not perfunctory, that's just a huge undertaking. So I think the funding ties back, in my mind, to the capacity and the reconciliation declaration that Islands Trust Council have made. If it is to have any meaning, then we have to be asking for the province to make those meaningful steps in terms of the decision-making processes with the Islands Trust Act and how that aligns with DRIPA. So those are just some of my thoughts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Commissioner Pearson. And over to Vice Chair Elliott.
Yeah, I don't want to add too much or belabor the points already made. I guess I just want to offer a picture of 1974 when provincial agencies were all within the same building. And someone said to me, it was like you could just walk down the hallway and talk to the Ministry of Transportation, and everything was together. And so the cooperative nature of the mandate was realistic in a time when everything's just much smaller. And I don't know how we're going to address this. Province is going to take this on. We have to grapple with these challenges anyways. But the problem is we're the only convener asking for all the other agencies to come meet us so that we can solve these problems together. And we have to use resident taxpayer funds to do that, to fulfill a mandate for the province. So it's gotten weightier and weightier, and the expectations of the public of that preserve and protect mandate in an age when we really want to see these beautiful islands and waters protected. It all kind of falls on us. We end up being the nexus of well, incredible criticism, fracture, debate, and I see it in every community that I go to. So I chair 4 other local trust committees and then serve on the Gabriel Local Trust Committee and on the Conservancy. And until I got into this role, I had no idea how different our communities were. The challenges from Muskegon to Saturna or South Pender versus North Pender, the community expectations for delivery of service, for protection of land, for management of the nature reserves, for more advocacy, action on climate change. We are really challenged, and I'm not saying that a call to the province is going to solve that, but we actually do need help. And I'm not sure how we're going to get there, but it's only through collaboration and cooperation, and we're going to have to put everybody together. And I would welcome any ideas, thoughts, or suggestions. I could lay out 100 stories of complicated island communities and what they're asking of the trust and the expectations of the trust that are simply impossible to fulfill right now. And so looking forward into the future and addressing climate change and reconciliation specifically, yes, we need a lot of support and work. And we're doing our work in-house, but there's a lot to do. So I don't have great answers. And it's very, very complex.
I'm curious then, in that, given the presentation that we just saw on the policy statement and the work that's happening there, you know, what's the interaction then between, or the influence of asking for a review of governance and asking for a review of how it is the processes unfold, that sort of how the entity's going to be managed and led. But how does that affect the scope of the policy statement, the development of the policy statement, and you know, the policy statement finishes before the governance review, and the governance review comes from the province. Size has moved in a totally different direction. Does that the policy statement work?
Well, I think the policy statement has, it needs to be updated.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens, I think that's what we need to move forward and continue to work on the parts and pieces that we have the jurisdiction, authority, and responsibilities to maintain. We must do it, we must do it with full integrity and the commitment of trust council and every trustee. That's what's on us, it's our obligations. So we do need to move forward, and I think the expectation is trust policy statement is a document that should never have been left sitting since the early 90s. It's like your official community plan. You need to visit it, you need to update it, you need to keep it current. The world changes, our knowledge, our understanding, our expectations are moving as we learn more. So I think that's what our hope is we've got to bring the document up to date. And it needs to be kept up to date going forward. So I don't see that as an impediment, and like I said, the work has to get done, the expectations are there, if you see them in your community every day, we don't have enough housing, we don't have, you know, the sea level or the storms and things are getting us, so we have to keep working. And I don't see anyone about, you know, it's like, so everyone is rolling up their sleeves and doing the best they can.
Yes.
Just want to comment on that. I've heard it from Director Frater a few times, so I just wanted to articulate it, that any draft of any update of the policy statement that raises the safety net First Nations, that actually includes nations' perspectives, is a vast improvement over what we have right now. That is the most critical point, I believe, for we must just get a better policy statement. The rest of the work, the governance review, all of that could take many, many years. But First Nations are asking to have their voices recognized as critically important, and that's, to me, that is the end goal. And if we don't accomplish it this term, I'm sure how we can leave that.
Yes, Councilor Best.
I think the way to look at the trust policy statement is like it's an OCP. It's an umbrella OCP over all the other OCPs, and it's just policy. It's a completely different beast from governance, which is democracy and intergovernmental and reconciliation through co-management or whatever it's going to end up being. Representation, political appointees. I wonder how it's going to shake out through the review of regional districts that UBCM is asking for. Is it UBCM? Anyway, ABICC, the other groups.
Metro Vancouver is being a special child as well.
Yeah, that's right. So regional districts, is that model working? That's sort of the governance sort of side of it. Maybe there's a lot of downloading in that to property taxes, and maybe it's not, we need more housing, maybe we need more diversity of housing, you know, but that's what shows up in the policy statement, which is policy that guides OCPs, and I think it's a smaller project. It's attracting a lot of attention, but I don't know.
And if I'm way off base, please let me know, but I think it's just like an OCP, only bigger area. Values.
That's true.
We're a group of elected officials and like councilors, we have our communities we care deeply about. So we're going to keep working on trying to solve the issues that we're facing and working with the mandate that we have.
But I find, from the chair, I find all of that encouraging, and even this conversation is encouraging. My future encouragement would be coming from a place of, there's, I think, something unique across all of the islands generally from the mainland is that there's a desire to be self-actualized. Whether it's within the confines of your own property as a property owner, or your own community, or your own specific island, there's a desire to be in control of one's destiny. The hope that I have for Bowen Island as a municipality and as a community, and I think this is what caused some of the consternation is that we need to be brought up. I think when we see, we've seen it already in the last term of the legislature, where when the province legislates from the top down, the solutions are so that some of the housing discussion, we've seen it with some of the other discussions coming into the legislature. So giving up our autonomy as island communities to the province and saying, as Trust Council, we're writing this letter, we haven't really asked a whole lot about it of our stakeholders, but we just want a governance review. The only part that goes through my mind is be careful what you wish for. The province might come back in a very heavy-handed stroke of the pen way and create solutions that nobody wanted in the first place. And I'm not saying that for better, for worse, or for criticism, other than a pitch for bring us along with you, bring the communities along with you, and if there's going to be major decisions about the governance that occurs within the borders of the island, we'd love to be a part of it, and we'd love to participate in it. And I think we have some expertise and some weight behind our voice as well. A united front across the stakeholders of the island, I think, is far more effective than, particularly with the trust, is that in its position as a convener across 7 regional districts with its own sort of unique elected officials, to really amplify the voices that are within 450 islands that are being represented. So I'm happy to have had this conversation. I'm happy to participate in anything moving forward in relation to governance, but my only admonition is bring us along in the future. We are a player here. We're unique in being the only municipality within the Islands Trust, and I think that gives us some additional help, some additional expertise, and some additional connections, particularly within the provincial government.
Adam Olson was a huge advocate, and I think he was whole vision for like a citizens assembly. It was really asking the province to really do that deep work and to fund it. I think that even the Islands Trust as we exist today, funding such a review is just beyond our capability.
Yeah, that's it's a major challenge of the trust as well, is to have the province pay for the entity that it created. From what you're saying, some of the issues that Councillor Morse brought up earlier as well. Councillor Gibb.
I don't want you or the community to have the impression that none of those topics, all of that was deeply discussed at that December meeting or the September meeting. That's the one that became so hot and volatile that there were repercussions following that, and the videos of that came down. So it was very deeply, honestly, and contested, all sorts of pros and cons and everything in between, in terms of those comments were all made And there was some urgency in terms of the election and being able to have a decision and being able to talk to candidates. And you know, I think that the feedback that we got from the First Nations and from the Conservancy and from this municipality, and both of the trustees from this municipality were part of that comment to the trust. And it was a hotly contested decision. And it's one that is very strongly felt from many different directions. And you know, we had lots of different advice, and it went out, and we're having difficulty dealing with it now. So for what it's worth, I think that my impression is that people have listened closely to the fact that we did not, as a body, get feedback from a lot of the stakeholders, and that was a mistake. So it's next time, if it ever comes up, then we'll have to figure out how to do it better. But it's not that any of those points were ignored, not even considered. That was very much part of the whole discussion.
Oh, there is some nuance there. That's worth pointing out, you know, and it's part of what I do want to presence that I struggle with, I think I'd be remiss by not saying it, is that in the conversations that I had during the meeting, you know, it wasn't a unanimous decision. There were certainly some trustees in that room who will be flat out that they felt no responsibility for themselves in any way, shape, or form. I did not take that away as a majority view. It was a minority one, a vocal one, but it was one that was still there, coming from the standpoint of Bowen Island. The conversations that we had around this council table, and where I would presume we would go in the future, is that we'd love to be part of this conversation. We'd be happy to, and you know, we feel our unique place in the landscape of the islands just as much as any of the other, it's Turner or Maine or Skeety or. Now I just want to name off islands because I feel like if I leave any of them out, then somebody watching us is gonna we'll be here for a while. Yeah, and I see Vice Chair Peterson there, so I'll jump to him to save myself the listing again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We as trust council, I think we all acknowledge that we failed to adequately consult with Bowen, and I think other partners as well. And in terms of the discussion, there was, and it's been touched on here, there was a sense of urgency about the timing of it to coincide with the provincial election. And there were those that argued that that sense of urgency wasn't the most important thing, and that some further reflection and a more careful approach was perhaps better. But in the end, the notion that it was important to make this statement in a way that interacted with the provincial election is what won the day. And I think that it's important to note that was a big factor on the timing, and had a lot to do, I think, with the deficits in communication with partners like Bowen and quite frankly First Nations. So not trying to defend those deficits, but just wanted to really outline that sense of urgency and in interaction with the provincial election period. That's what won the day, and that's why the decision was made when it was, from my perspective. I think that's just what I wanted to share there.
Yeah, and hopefully at some point the province feels that same sense of urgency. Okay, so not seeing any further comments, we'll move on to some of the Bowen Island side pieces that we wanted to share with you. And they really hinge around two items. So the first is our strategic plan update. So as well as our OCP, evolution of our OCP. And presuming I'm speaking to this, yes, great, okay. Got that right. So the things that we're, I think as a council that have been pretty proud of as we've been moving through the term is our strategic plan and how that's become more and more refined. We've really attempted to treat it as a living document. And when we first came in to council, 5 out of 7 of us were brand new. Never served a day of local government in our life to both, I think, our benefit at times and our detriment at others. And when we first got into a strategic planning session, I remember sort of standing there as a newly minted mayor of, okay, well, what do we tangibly do? I think we all had a sense of what it is that we wanted to accomplish through the term. And so we just started there and we identified 4 main pillars in that first year that we wanted to iterate on as we moved through the term. And those included building a diverse and resilient community, strong infrastructure and asset management, engaged community and effective government, and responsible ecosystem protection. And those 4 pillars were really out of response, I think, to a lot of what had us feel called, put our hands up and run for this crazy goal in the first place. And since then, we revisit our strategic plan formally in a way to rewrite it every year, but then we also meet on it quarterly to update on it and to address any emerging issues that we might want to have. And so far, it's been pretty effective. So, when we look at a diverse and resilient community, this is really, in 2022, coming out of the pandemic, feeling splintered in the community, looking at our local government and a lot of the, I think, disagreements and conflicts and reputational issues in the community. There was a need to resolve that from the effective government standpoint, but then also to build back resilience from what felt like a shaky and brittle time. So things that we're working on now, we've got diverse and affordable housing. We have some community lands that we're developing a plan for. And I could not go without mentioning Councillor Wake, who has been really leading and spearheading a move towards building a community-owned housing organization on the island that we're moving towards. We were successful in obtaining Housing Accelerator Fund monies, and we got a top-up for that through the work that Mr. Martin's been doing in the planning department. We built this facility that we got in, so there was this theme also completing what was started, so getting this done was a big one. We've been advocating for transportation options, such as doing our best to support where we can anybody that wants to bring passenger ferry service to the island. And so far, it's emerged that Green Line Ferries is looking to run an electric passenger ferry service to the island, and then as well as building revenue and looking at ways that we can that we haven't already to diversify ourselves from just property taxes. So implementing the municipal district regional district tax. Development cost charges for wastewater, and then also in that to protect housing, we opted into the short-term rental legislation that was put forward by the province, affecting principal ownership. Strong infrastructure and asset management. So this is probably a bit different than where the trust finds its capacity. So one of the things we've got to do on the island is manage all of our utilities. So we have 7 local water service areas. We have a sewer local service area. We've got roads to maintain, rolling stock, all of that stuff. And we didn't really know what the infrastructure deficit was when we came back into the office. So getting a sort of first stab at what that looked like and finding that we're, close to $100 million of infrastructure deficit in a community where a 1% tax increase nets us, I think, $80,000 now or $75,000 now is a huge task. It felt like opening the bills that you just sort of let pile up on the table and didn't want to look at. And since then, our chief financial officer, now our new chief administrative officer, has done a lot of fantastic work in starting to refine those numbers and getting clear on what's aging, what has a high consequence of failure, what has a high probability of failure, and then starting to make some plans to address that deficit in a way that's going to make our community financially sustainable and move away from, I think, to make an extreme example of like waiting for things to break before we fix them, and being a bit more proactive in how we manage our infrastructure. Engage community and effective government was the third pillar. So we've looking at increasing and deepening our relationship with the Squamish Nation. We recently, through the leadership and advocacy of Councillor Fast, joined the Association of Vancouver Island Communities, which has been a great move, and we attended their conference lately. So I think we're one of the few municipalities that's a member of 2 local government associations now, just highlighting our split personality at times between this Venn diagram of governance of Metro Vancouver to the east of us and the Islands Trust to the west of us. It was wonderful to sit beside Chair Patrick here at the Mayor Chairs and Chiefs Forum, and then actually interact with island communities. So they certainly feel more like my people, and interacting with the mayors and councils of the million plus population municipalities that we see in the mainland. So that was a wonderful thing. We have struck an accessibility committee, and we're moving towards completing an accessibility plan with those folks. And then a lot of organizational efficiencies. So part of effective government has been to increase transparency. I think we've kept our closed meetings to a minimum. We made moves at the start of the term to release and open up documents that caused us to take some heat, particularly around Cape Roger Curtis. Although I think at the end of the day, we're better for in that the community seems to know that, well, we're doing what we say that we're going to do, and whenever there's something contentious, we're able to point at something in an open meeting and say, well, no, this was actually said here, here's a discussion, here's how it broke down. And it seems like that way of going has calmed things down. Responsible ecosystem protection. So this is near and dear to our heart, I think, as members of the Islands Trust. Looking at land conservation, so on our strategic plan is continuing to engage with Squamish Nation as well as the province for this is a longer term plan, like what is the ultimate disposition of crown land on the islands. We have some major crown land blocks on the island. Some of them I believe are timber lots as well. I pity the company that tries to log those on the island for the protest that would ensue, but I think it opens up some interesting conversations about what is the future of crown land on the island. In order to do that, we'll have to engage the Squamish First Nation as well as the province, and I'm very curious to see where those come up. Another is looking at land use designations for parks. So we have a lot of land that we consider parks and isn't zoned as such, and Councillor Fast has been advocating for this issue as well, and it pretty recently come up. I just heard you were just somewhere where they were talking about the same thing. Maybe I was dreaming it. Oh, at the Howe Sound Forum. Yeah, somebody at the Howe Sound Forum discussing that. We're deep in a conversation about tourism on the island and how to manage tourism in a way that feels, you probably shared with, I think, many of the conversations you're likely having in Salt Spring, where everybody else is talking about how to draw more tourism to their communities because it's the economic driver. And for us, it's like, what are the municipal tools that we have available to us to deal with the level of visitation that's going around, because it's impacting our town center, especially when everybody comes in through the ferry. Water sustainability, we've changed the water governance of our 7 water systems on the island. We've consolidated, we disbanded 7 local area or local service committees and taken much more control and visibility of that at the council level and deployed more effective community engagement, which has been fantastic. And I think what that's going to allow us to do that we're having some tentative conversations on is what does a whole island water management plan look like, and how do we get at that in addition to some watershed planning. The last in climate change action, we've just hired we're in the process of hiring a climate action intern. Hired, okay, so they've been brought on board. Who's going to take a look at our climate action strategy and begin and then do a review of the regional strategies that backs into, both from the Islands Trust. The Squamish Nation has a climate legacy strategy is what they call it, as well as Metro Vancouver's Climate 2050. Where does Bowman fit into that, and what does climate action look like on our hyper-local level? So those are the items from our strategic plan. So we've got a lot going, and even just going through that from A to Z, like I'm always involved in one little part of it, but to like look at it overall, there's a lot that we're doing, a lot that we're taking on with the year and a bit left of the term. The last conversation we had at our big strategic planning meeting wasn't around adding stuff. And it was like, okay, how do we bring this stuff to ground? Like, how do we close this term and finish what we started and get it done? So, you know, coming from this kind of philosophical start of these 4 pillars and then iterating on it, now it's getting it done, and meeting our commitments of integrity to the community.
I was just gonna say, for stats, we had 39 actions in total. And I believe you guys have today, we've already crossed maybe 6 of those off the list. The biggest and most important being to come into this building. And it's been working with its councils and just do that strategic plan update and at a time that we feel we can deliver. So it's been great.
I just wanted to talk about your communications. It's obvious, clear. Your materials that you put out are so easy to understand. I shadowed the work that your planning department was doing last year on the community meetings for deciding to opt in on the short-term rentals. Just looking at how quickly you were able to set up a website, your information to read on the website was plain language, easy to understand, and I think we need to copy what you're doing. I'd love to understand how you're doing it, because that on 13 islands.
Any other questions or comments on our strategic plan? Yes, Vice Chair.
You didn't touch on your leadership development program. Is that anticipated for next year in your organizational efficiency?
Yeah, that's much more operational, so maybe I'll let.
We got a later, we're good.
Okay, so it's on the staff. Okay, great.
Did you want to touch in on the leadership development staff?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. So we're an organization that's matured, you know, so incorporated in 1999, and where we felt that like we had a lot of managers who maybe come up through the ranks to become senior managers. That usually happens through a process of attrition. Some people move on and they're thrust into this role. So we want to give our senior management team the tools to be effective in their roles. So competency-based training. So one of the forms of that was the Indigenous corporate training. We had a session last fall on that. We had a senior team retreat where we brought in an external facilitator to talk about things like cultural norms, our mission, and just trying to get staff as a whole kind of rowing the boat in the same direction and giving the tools to excel in their jobs. And I wouldn't say it's so much about leadership development strategy. I think it's a staff development strategy. There's areas where we feel we could use corporate training. So procurement is one of the ones. And the senior leadership team, we discuss that people need a base understanding of procurement, why do things like go out and get 3 quotes and things like that. And
Sure, your CEO, Ruben can appreciate from his HR background that in order to get the best outcomes on staff, we need to invest in terms of training to make sure they have the skills.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Councilor Fast.
I just wanted to bring up the idea of the freshwater sustainability that we're speaking to. And there's been a big project that the Islands Trust has been doing, the freshwater strategy project that involves a lot of mapping. And I think the end of March was when the maps were going to come out and that kind of thing. Is that something that Bowen has reached out to the Islands Trust about, or can somebody speak a little bit about what tools or what might be available to Bowen to help with our freshwater strategy work at this point?
To staff.
I was the one that went to all the water committee meetings.
Right.
My recollection is that we engaged Urban Systems and we've done some what's the term for them? Aquifer studies for the west side. Honeymoon Lake is, several of our systems are not freshwater, they're well, they're freshwater in that, but they're surface water, so they're lakes. So there's a difference between aquifers, which is I think what most of the Islands Trust Islands are, versus freshwater system. Surface water system. So I think a lot of those studies have been done, and I don't know whether they've been sent over to the Islands Trust to include in their work, but
It just struck me that this was a place where we could make sure we weren't duplicating each other's work, or whatever tools were available that Bowen staff knew about them. Because we as trustees see the reports and things come through for decisions at Trust Council, but we don't always see because we're not involved in the planning sort of side of things, we don't see much. I'm not complaining because I know William Schultz came here, presented to council, and there's probably lots of tools available. I'm just not sure that our staff and our project of strategic plan project of water sustainability is hooked into those yet. So I'll volunteer to find out more about that and connect some dots, even if it's only for me.
Thank you, Councilor Fast. We'll look to staff and then Councilor Getty, followed by Vice Chair Ellis.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just, is there a question? The question is it on the broader water conservation efforts ongoing?
My question is, Islands Trust area wide has been doing some mapping and resource modeling and building. And I just wanted to make sure that whatever work might be useful to Bowen staff, that Bowen staff knew about it. And I didn't know if that was in the case.
Yeah, so it is in our strategic plan to look at water conservation and supply as a major strategy to addressing what's happening ongoing. I don't believe there's been any direct interaction between our staff and Islands Trust staff, but having met Islands Trust new CEO today, hoping to develop that relationship. Any tools that we can use from Island Trust, we definitely look at. We're in terms of our staff, the message being if there's good tools out there that can help our situation, let's not necessarily reinvent the wheel here. Let's see what other jurisdictions are doing and see if they can be applied here. And I guess one example is in terms of water restrictions and how those are managed. You can look no further than the Sunshine Coast Regional District as having kind of the gold standard on how that's managed, and because they deal with that crisis every year. So as we look towards updating ours, we'll look to that jurisdiction for guidance from them. But similarly, if Islands Trust has good tools and resources, I'd love to have the conversation after this meeting if we can.
All right, we can go to Bear Super Friends building then. Councilor Getty.
And I think it's important to highlight then that our CAO was the former director of engineering at Sunshine Coast, so Oh, these gold
No,
standard.
it's seashell.
programs that, okay, close enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, you know, the gold standard, got his fingers in it. Doesn't have a green thumb, it's got a gold thumb. So I'm not sure if you were at the last Caring for Nature meeting, but the Conservancy was talking about, and Carla Scoots, our Director of Parks and Environment, is a member of that. I can't remember if she was present either, but there's some discussion in terms of, is it William Cosmo? Shulmuth, who with the Conservancy has been doing some outstanding work with all the water mapping. And he apparently has a graduate student from UBC that he considers to be another gold standard. And so there was some talk at the last meeting in terms of making sure that if we hadn't studied Bowen, that we figure out a way of getting him over to study Bowen. So the Conservancy is very interested in having that baseline information about capacity and quantity and standards. So there is an interconnection, I think, happening.
I'm gonna
I just want to make sure that you don't study something that's already been studied.
Yep.
Because I think most of the studies, the bathymetry's been done on Grafton Lake, on Hood Point Lake, on Josephine Lake, all that
John
stuff.
Dowler's been doing all of that mapping, so he's got all.
To be clear, we're not passing any motions or resolutions or directing work here. We're in a conversation. So I'm gonna go to Vice Chair Elliott.
Well, actually, there is a webinar tomorrow, and it's centered on Gabriola, because this has been the focus area for developing the methodology for our freshwater footprint project. And so it's tied to our OCP review. We've been waiting for a long time for Gabriola to get this, but basically our freshwater specialist in the mapping project, I believe, has been since 2018 going through the Gulf Islands. They went through phase 1 through the Southern Gulf Islands. Phase 2 was Denman and Galliano, I believe. And phase 3 really centers on Gabriola, and it's been improving the methodology each time. So we had a $50,000 budget specifically dedicated to not just mapping the groundwater, but doing community engagement to understand where water is being used. So it's called a footprint or a water balance project because we know where the water is, the aquifers in the region, but we don't know where it's coming out. And so to understand that balancing project, it's going to involve community. So tied with our OCP review, we've got a water sort of a community group, a focus group that's going to follow along with the specialists and do some supportive engagement. We've had 3 webinars planned. The first one is tomorrow, and there's a few specialists going. So it's a community flow monitoring network, and I can pass you that information. But yeah, our freshwater specialist is very excited about it. This is probably the most mature development of the mapping and how it's going to cut in practice in terms of planning for those development permit areas and for the protection of the critical recharge areas. So, yeah.
Please do send us an invite to those webinars.
Sure.
I'll see, get some staff to attend and learn from those.
Okay. And sorry, and just to tie back to, I believe you did say that groundwater, so GW Solutions had done a climate assessment and land use assessment over 25 years on Bowen. And so we might, I don't know if we've got data on Bowen still, but if we need to connect the dots, then William's very nerdy and he'll talk water all the time with you if you want. Thanks,
That's
Grace.
all I wanted to, there were connections to be made.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here. It seemed like we have any other comments or questions on that. We'll move on to official community plan. It's just a very quick update on that as the executive council does look at and approve official community plans of Bowen Island. We're fairly excited about this. So this is an initiative that kicked off last year. Was an update and a rewrite of our official community plan. The last time our community plan was kicked off for the community plans in 2011, so we're overdue as well. And it's been a great process so far. So we assembled a committee of 13, I believe it was originally, 13 community members, including 2 council liaisons. And a real diverse set of expertise that those community members have. I mean, the way that we set it up is, chaired for the first couple of months, but then, what's really, we'd like this to be community driven. And council gave the direction that we need a new official community plan, and we would like it based on United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as well as circular economies. So that's the 3 planks of direction that committee has gotten. They've engaged a consultant and had some of the initial sort of frame setting conversations, and also come together themselves, and we're kicking off public engagement on the new OCP starting in May. And maybe I'll look to our manager of planning and development just for some more of the details, because I've been a little bit more removed. No, I didn't want to. We don't want to make it look like the mayor's thumb is on the scales of the official community plan. So it's really what this committee right now.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Leonard. I mean, yeah, that's a great overview, and we are really excited to be at this point where next week we launch our survey and start our engagement on that first round of engagement on the OCP. So looking at big, broad themes, trying to go out to the community with the visions and goals of our 2011 OCP, and essentially trying to do a gauge at this point of like, these were the vision, this was the vision, these were the goals of that OCP. Do these still resonate with people? What new challenges do we have? New opportunities? Where do you see Bowman going the next 20 years? So we're doing that through May and early June. Online survey, we'll do pop-up engagements. We've got our steering committee are volunteering as we speak live to sign up for those different events, and we'll add engagement opportunities as we go. And then we want to bring that all back. Matt Lahini will put together a report on what we've heard. We'll bring that to council with some, at that point, some direction, saying, okay, this is where we think this OCP is going. This is what we're hearing. This is how much we've heard. And then the goal will be to draft some of the more detailed policy work, and then in the fall, do a second round of engagement on that detailed policy work before coming back to council in the winter with bylaw goal. I'm sure with everything, the goal is then the bylaw adoption happen in that spring of 2026 is our targeted goal. And I'm sure we'll work with the Islands Trust staff on how to do sort of the early ongoing consultation on an OCP. And I would imagine we would start doing that in that phase 2 engagement. We have some of the policy work. Having been part of OCP amendment bylaws and the process for that, but as this is a whole big thing, we kind of, same as with council, we don't want to bring a bylaw of a complete new bylaw and be like, what do you think? Tell us in 30 days, but how to work out that ongoing engagement with the new bylaw. And with that too, one of the other things we flagged for our consultants is the policy trust statement work. So trying to come up with an OCP that will align with the current policy statement and meet the directive policies, but be alive to where the state of the draft is for a new one. So our goal is not to end up with a bylaw that's adopted that meets the policy statement as of today, and then going forward, we've now got misalignment and try to work with those 2 documents.
Any questions or comments about CP? Yes, sure.
We're just behind you. We're a few weeks on Salt Spring, so I'm going to be looking closely at what you're doing.
Salt Spring going to become a municipality as part of it? Is that still a question that's off limits?
No, we just had to get some agreement to update the OCP, so that'll be another challenge.
That's so fast.
Just in view of the survey going out, there's also going to be a survey coming from Islands Trust through Financial Planning Committee that I chair, but I'm just a new chair, and this is just a process to try and do some budget planning well ahead. So not 20 years ahead, but like 2 years ahead, so that we can get public input into the budget process in a way that works for a trust council that only meets 4 times a year. So there will be another survey coming in, but it's different.
What timing is that?
May 1st.
Yes, Mr. Owen.
So on the OCP project, Gabriel is in our phase for a year and a half. So we did a visioning process. We did some big goals, objectives, values, and now we're in policy development. And so I would say this is one of the most mature processes that I've seen coming out of the trust. We've got a very innovative planner. I'm super impressed with her work, and it's all been developed in-house. We actually haven't used consultants, but we'd be happy to share. We've pulled together all the information from across the trust area on DPAs, for instance, and protection areas. And so you might want to connect if you want to just see where those draft policies are landing. But we've got focus groups, water, ecosystems, housing, economy, and all of that. And that's been a really effective way to get more nuance and qualitative answers and sort of storytelling in the community. Of course, there's big surveys going out too, but yeah, I think for a community of our size, 4,500 with very different, lots of different opinions, we are moving through the process quite quickly and efficiently. So I can connect you with Planner Chadwick, who's been leading it, and should be a great resource if you want.
Sure, agree. Okay, and then the last item on our agenda is the wild card, the open forum. Anything that folks want to discuss or talk about, or joint advocacy, something like that, or folks feeling spent, Councillor.
Yeah, nothing that I particularly want to talk about except say like this. I wasn't really sure what to expect coming out of this, but it's actually been, from my point of view, really useful to get a fuller understanding of where we sit with the trust and what the trust does for us and what we do with it. And maybe I've been remiss in not investigating myself further over the past couple of years, but certainly feel a lot more confident about what I know about this and where we fit in, and answer questions a little more intelligently that might come to me over the next 2 years. So thanks for organizing this, to whoever organized it, and for the input that I've listened to today.
Yes, sir. Councillor Fast, followed by Chair Becker.
I just wondered if this might be a moment to talk a little bit about ferry advocacy, because you're very busy with it now, and maybe some others are. But Islands Trust has done a bunch of that work over the years, and maybe it's a moment to sort of talk about how we might work together.
Sure. How might we work together?
Well, maybe, Claire, can you just say a few words about what's been done in the past, and whether you, then people can decide whether it's worth looking at.
Certainly. So the trust has a agreement with BC Ferries around, how we communicate, but the trust has in the past, I was the policy advisor at the time, undertook a significant campaign, I think how long ago now, probably over 10 years now ago, to undertake a campaign around BC Ferry fares. And, we hired economists, we actually hired another economist, the first economist, and provided, did really research-based advocacy to ferries around ferry fares was one example. That was quite successful actually in building affairs. We've also advocated in the past around service levels for islands, and sort of having service levels that match community need and drawing community attention to that. Yeah, so we certainly can stand with Bowen Island Municipality. And certainly you would have to request something of our council, and then staff take the direction of council to assist the chair in advocating for a particular change at BC Ferries. But we would, I think, I could say that I think our trust council would be very interested to hear what support and allegiance Bowen Island Municipality would be looking for. And then we have policy advisor myself that could assist with executing anything that's requested, and assist our chair spokesperson to help with that. We also, as I say, we have an agreement with BC Ferries, and we could certainly activate that as needed for conversations.
Thank you. I think just to speak to ferries generally, and as charitably as possible, the sentiment on Bowen Island and speaking to some of the other elected officials in the area is that we're seeing service degrade in ways that is affecting livability of residents, our ability to manage the traffic. So there's no BC Ferry staff on the island. Their actual terminal footprint is very, very small. It basically ends at the end of the ferry ramp. And it's becoming, our residents are increasingly looking to the municipality as the ones responsible for it, when we don't feel like we're responsible, and we can't fund it. And so we're going into a peak season that, after a disastrous Easter long weekend in Horseshoe Bay, that really affected both Bowen Island and Gibsons. You may have seen some of the advocacy that myself and Mayor White did in the press recently, and sending a letter to the Premier. There's a real concern of what this looks like through the peak season and the busy season. We may start getting traction from that. It does seem like things are changing internally at BC Ferries with their engagement structure, and in some respects, they've been, I think, much more communicative, and then in other ways, it feels like they have operational changes that didn't get consulted on and have really affected our residents. To bring this into the current conversation between Bowen Island and the Islands Trust, the conversation that would be interesting if I was to spectate, as I will from my bubble outside of the trust, is that there's the opportunity for the trust really to be, I think, if it wanted to take it on, a convener of the elected officials in very effective communities. So I think part of the challenge and part of the reason why it's been difficult to advocate on a sort of unified level with BC Ferries is that the small ferry affected communities straddle the 7 regional districts we've been talking about. The elected officials at a municipal level that represent those areas are either Islands trustees who don't necessarily directly have a transportation mandate, or it's electoral area directors who frequently, from my observation of regional district tables, are sort of left to the sidelines to the municipal representatives at those board tables. So it would be very interesting for the Islands Trust to be a convener of smaller ferry affected communities to bring those groups together and then get some accountability between the province, the BC Ferries board of directors and senior management, the ferry authority and the ferry commissioner. We cannot seem to get the same. And should we not see things change, I'm sure Salt Spring, I think Salt Spring has faced some ferry cancellations this past weekend as well. One of the terminals. It would be very interesting to have the elected officials in all of those areas in one place to really start dialing up the heat on the province, as well as the ferry organizations. So that would be my recommendation. And that speaks to really sort of my opinion of the trust more broadly, having this role of convener that I don't know is, given all of the sort of what seems like internal discussions in the trust with governance and policy statement and doing that internal work, like my hope is when it emerges as this beautiful butterfly that we all hope that it's going to be, that it really serves as a convener for those island-wide issues, because the Islands Trust is not local government, it's not a municipality, but it straddles ridings, it straddles electoral areas, it straddles regional districts, and I think there's a real opportunity there to be the catalyst that brings those advocacy conversations together.
Good more.
Yeah.
Sales. Okay, yes, we'd like to emerge and deal with these issues for certain. I just want to mention, I saw that you were hiring like ferry flaggers, so forth. And Salt Spring BC Ferries provides that all of the term, because we have the same thing, and they do in Crofton on the other side, which is in the municipal area. So it's interesting why you're having to pay for that and they're providing it in other cities.
So it's been certainly requested at BC Ferries. So just for context, the Route 8 here, which is the busiest minor route of the system, is just over 1 million people a year. And on the Snud Cove side, there's no BC Ferry staff, and they've consistently declined either to take on a road lease of the ferry lanes so that they can provide staff, or increase the resources available to Bowen Island to manage this. So the ferry lanes that we see here, it's municipal roadway, it's municipally funded, and we've been put in the position of, in the absence of BC Ferries taking responsibility, it's become our job to hire our own ferry fighters. And I think a side effect of that is the community sees that and they begin to think that it's a municipal issue, and then we get blamed for it when it's really a BC Ferries piece to solve. The way that I talk about it is that we don't hire lunchtime patrols for the school. We don't hire bus drivers. We don't hire military. Like, it's just that it's a different level of government whose responsibility is to deal with this. And I'm not sure why they haven't come to the table in a fulsome way. So this is part of the advocacy that we're doing.
So just a clarification question on the other side. I've been in the lineup on the road in Crofton several times and I've never seen anybody flagging. But are they BC Ferries employees or are they independent contractors?
They probably are contractors, but they're
Yeah.
hired by BC Ferries.
Yeah, so that's what I think we have to push for, because their workers can't go off the BC Ferries property, otherwise they're not covered by WCB. But in Horseshoe Bay, outside the ferry, outside the ticket booths, it's all, they're all contracted. They're not BC Ferry employees. So.
They're pretty much there year round now. It started to be a summer season issue and now it's year round.
And they contract on Salt Spring for Fulford
And Vesuvius.
and Vesuvius, yeah.
Red-headed stepchild there. Sorry.
Councilor Gay, did you have your?
Well, I think it would be interesting in terms of just possibly a simple survey to help. And if we are going to get together in some sort of argument in terms of service, just, you know, what are, we anecdotally understand what happens because we go to Crofton occasionally or we go to Vesuvius occasionally, but we're not sure what uniforms people wear and whether or not they, you know, have the any kind of land or what the facilities are. You know, here we've got a 2-seater toilet that they hire somebody to clean. That's it. Right? They sell 1 million tickets, but they expect something to happen that some miracle to happen in terms of all the people that come into our village. And it just gridlocks the village so that, you know, it's getting to the point where you know, I don't know the village in summertime. It's just, it's a walking distance and I don't have anything. So, yeah, it is a problem here. It's something that we're trying to tackle. And, yeah, it would be a great idea if I had suggested that we convene some sort of meeting like that, but it's even better, I think, in terms of having the trust to do something that could be a project. Yeah, I don't know how we would go about organizing that, but I'll leave that up to Claire.
That was my question is, Claire, what would you need from Bowen Island Council to come to, I imagine, a trust council, or would it just be staff to staff, or what comes to mind as something that would be helpful to bring this idea to?
So a number of paths for advocacy. So if Bowen Island ever has, a municipality ever has a request of Islands Trust Council, it'd be great to write a letter and explain why your request might be. And then of course, we've just adopted a strategic plan, so council would need to consider the request in the context of its limited strategic plan. The other mechanism we've used in the past has been a UBCM motion of some sort, if there's something that we feel we share in common with other coastal communities. We've also convened meetings at the BC Municipalities Convention, where in the past, Bowen Island Municipality and Islands Trust both hosted a meeting with the relevant agencies and invited other local governments to join. So there's a variety of, you know, methods, but I think it starts with, you know, asking Islands Trust Council to prioritize whatever it is that's important to Bowen Island Municipality. And I would also add with that, I think it's pretty, as we look ahead, what are shared interests? You know, we've got an election again in about a year and a half. You know, as the next councils come in and start thinking about how they frame up their term, really effective advocacy takes a bit of time, right? You need to build over a couple of years, usually your alliances, your campaign, you know, your really good arguments. So it's really good to start kind of laid out for the next term, you know, to build that in advance and do some proactive thinking around what are the jointly shared undertakings that the two bodies want to do together, and then put together a really good plan that you can then execute, you know, either carry over an election or execute after an election and carry it forward. Some of the biggest accomplishments of Islands Trust around ocean protection plan issues, you know, the derelict vessel legislation, the BC ferry fare change, you know, it took us 8 to 10 years. You know, not to suggest an issue like this would take that long, but it does take some preparation and consistent messaging by a number of players. So building that coalition takes time. But certainly it starts with a letter, I would suggest, and then talking with your colleagues. And maybe a presentation as needed to explain the perspective of the municipality and, you know, be convincing at that council table.
Got a couple of people that want to jump in, so I'm gonna go to our CAO, then Vice Chair Peterson, and Councilor Morse.
Yeah, thank you. I think as I delve into this file and work with council to come up with some strategies on how to address this, there's some obviously unique things to go in, but when you talk about those shared interests that maybe span all the islands, the one area I could think of is the concept of a shared resident loading. I don't know if that's come up on other island, but yeah, for residents to have the ability to have an assured loading on Taylor ferries.
Vice Chair Peterson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in the discussions I've been able to have with BC Ferries and previously with Ministry of Transport, one of the things I think is worth pushing on is their stated goals around active transportation, and I think when we look at the ferries that serve our islands, there's some serious safety issues around directing active transportation safely through these interfaces, especially on the islands. Although through the bigger, you know, they do a better job at, say, Schwartz Bay or Horseshoe Bay. But I think that's just something to put in your pool of concepts that you may want to bring out. Certainly in any kind of joint advocacy, but even when you're doing that work on your own there. I know there's, as you mentioned, that this sort of special case in terms of the ownership of those laneways there, but I think there's some potential there that you might want to explore.
Vice Chair, Councilor Morse.
I was thinking with UBCM coming up in September, and I don't think they've got all the slots filled for what they're gonna have, having a workshop on BC Ferries and BC Ferry service and community consultation. All the regional district directors are gonna be there, and the trust and all the local municipalities up and down the coast. So it would be an ideal place to get everybody all at once.
Certainly, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you to the chair. I certainly don't discount what Director Freder had to say there in terms of building the coalition, and it takes time to get your arguments in place, and but the reality is we're 3 weeks from an untenable situation here starting May long weekend. We don't have 10 years, we don't have 1 month. And I think if there's any way we can fast track whatever leverage that ourselves and the trust and the other island if possible, if we can leverage that in any way to put some pressure on BC Ferry. I don't even know that it's possible, mind you, but I think you did a good job of trying to manage our expectations there. But I think our expectations are, we have to be unrealistic and say, we need something, we need it now. And if we can get help from the trust doing that, if we can get help from gifts, if we get help from the wherever we can get it, we need to put some leverage out there somehow. And if the trust can be part of that leverage, then we need to find a way to fast track that somehow. I don't know what that way is, mind you.
Director Freder.
The one thing I would also add, in terms of that, like needing to move now and move quickly, the one thing that you benefit from as being part of this federation is the colleagues you've got at the council table. So you could, certainly talk with your colleagues here and blast out an email, do that informal work around, reaching out through those other networks to build, an alliance that's not built through the formal structures. Certainly that's been done in the past, I think, where, you leverage the friendships that you have between all these islands and use a more community-based approach is certainly something that has been done in the past. And is the beauty of Bowen being part of this federation is you've got all these colleagues to assist you in spreading a message and finding the knowledge keepers in the different islands who have, the ability to help amplify your messages that way as well.
That's true.
Hope we can move on to another thorny topic too, but yeah, this summer, I think Salt Spring, every summer's been like twice as bad as the previous one. I'm very worried about this summer. I think we're gonna have a lot of islands stressed with the traffic levels that are gonna be on these ferries. So it's gonna get loud, I think.
We stop.
Oh, there's, I mean, as a municipal roadway, it's a highway the
Yeah.
municipality has authority over, so
Yeah.
there's ways to look at it, but the challenge is. It doesn't go down the road.
I understand the challenges, yeah.
How do we do with hurting our residents?
Yeah.
We move on to housing, oh, we're still ferries.
Just as a last point, I sent you some photos from a campaign about 10 years ago, when, again, the services were really bad. It didn't improve after that, but it was just a whiteboard and magic markers, and people would write a message to BC Ferries in their own words. We just called it in their own words, all Facebook, everybody participated. That we bumped into, it was just a few municipal councillors at the time that did it. So there are some quick ways. Anyway, that's there if we want to get into Facebook.
At the buzzer, yep.
Just want to mention, back in the day, Islands Trust hosted a tourism forum and brought together all the partners, and there was a report produced. I'm going to dig it out and just have a refresh look at that and see what recommendations might be there. But that's the sort of thing that you might want to consider for the next term, is planning ahead and hosting something that's like, I do feel with the islands, tourism and the day of social media and Instagram and everything else, certainly, I think a growing pressure of tourism that's butting up against ferry capacity, water capacity, maintenance of community character and consistency through the summer. That's what I'm feeling, and I'm hearing it from Form B, or hearing it from others. So that might be a topic that warrants, some focused attention in the next term as, part of your strategic approaches.
And on to the thorny topic of housing.
Well, I was thinking more, because I was thinking for Councillor Tim, we took some time at ABICC to passionately talk about housing. We know that the BC housing funding model just doesn't work well on our islands. And we try to turn ourselves into pretzels to create housing projects that meet their programs rather than housing programs that meet our needs. And I think there's another advocacy topic there in our emerged state of working together to try to get funding programs that work on a little stronger.
Any thoughts on housing?
I mean, we're certainly beginning to look at less at BC Housing and CMHC, and the brightest light I can is impact investment funds, where they're looking for return on impact as much or more than financial return. We'll see where we get with that. But I think it's a good example of the kind of innovation that we need, and we also need innovation in construction techniques and whatever the next iteration of modular and manufactured, especially in our situations, if we could plug things in rather than at the same time. We want to work on a regenerative circular economy on Bowen, And so, as much as possible, we want to get, capture as much of that construction and employment as we can locally. So maybe some competing interests there.
I don't know, your planner certainly knows about this, but the Small Housing DC organization has a huge toolkit of resources about gentle density and different options. I mean, it started with laneway homes in Vancouver and stuff, but I've been going to their webinars and they're excellent. They provide a lot of services for planners and a toolbox with a lot of different ways of considering housing. I don't think they don't have tiny homes on wheels, but that's because most planners, well, anyway, we'll get into that. But Small Housing BC.org. And so they've got a gentle density network. Gentle density is sort of the it's talking about infill that's different from the conventional single family dwelling. So I do encourage you to check that out. There's some great resources.
Yeah, I know Jay Fry.
Oh, of
well,
course, yeah.
And I've been following.
You're right about it.
And a few of those events.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. In fact, I've talked to him a couple of times about getting him over here, and I think he's probably pretty keen. We haven't done that, so we should do that.
We've got tools for planners.
Regardless, yeah, he's got great ideas. And actually, I worked for a couple of years at Habitat for Humanity, Vancouver, and his company built one of our projects.
Okay, not seeing any further questions or comments. All right, we've got a date for our next meeting on here, Wednesday, October 29th.
After this agenda was published, Alexandra at the Office Trust actually let me know that date was in the conflict. People are going to be arrested. So we're hoping to Senator D.
The corporate officers duke it out from there, and with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor
No,
Morris.
I'm not moving. I wanted to remind everybody it's Wednesday, so there is no 4 o'clock ferry. And does
Okay.
anybody want to tour the island before they go home? They can't hit me up. I've got to go and deal with my sister-in-law issues, but one of you guys might be able to drive you around.
The 3 o'clock ferry might not have left yet. You never
It's
know.
left.
It's a joke.
For once, it's on time.
Early for the next one. Yes, Councilor Fest.
I have an online course I've got to be at in half an hour or at home, but I'd be happy to walk out with people just to see the housing that we've been developing across from the new fire hall and that kind of thing. So it's multifamily and the seniors assisted living is under construction there, and I can show you the site of the, we can just do a quick half-hour walk if you want. And there's a health center and fire hall on the way.
All right, we're getting chatty, so I'm going for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Getty, second by Councilor Saunders. All in favor, as you're gonna say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and then we can figure out social.